God challenges us to welcome the stranger.
Just because God commands us to welcome the stranger doesn't mean that we need to open our borders without control.
The American Religious Town Hall meeting is now in session.
Welcome, friends, to the American Religious Town Hall meeting, where the discussion of religious, political, and social issues is meant to promote the cause of religious freedom and to help us better understand each other. And now, here's your host and moderator, Pastor Jerry Lutz.
Thank you. I'm so glad you've decided to join us for today's program. I'm sure you've been looking forward to it, as I have. And we're very happy to have assembled together a really wonderful panel. You're going to hear from them in just a few moments. But I do want to say, if you're a regular viewer, thank you for your continued support. And if this program is new to you, we're very glad you've joined us today. I think you're going to enjoy the experience. Let's have our panelists introduce themselves and tell a little bit about what they do. Let's start with the gentleman to my right.
Hi, I'm Carl Trovall. I'm the Richard J. Dinda Professor of Lutheran Identity and Mission at Concordia University in Austin, Texas.
I'm Dan Levin. I'm the Senior Rabbi at Temple Bethel of Boca Raton, Florida.
I am John Peterson. I am a canon in the Episcopal Church and am canonically resident in the Diocese of Washington.
I'm Tom Plumbley. I'm a minister in the Christian Church Disciples of Christ, and I serve as the minister of First Christian Church in Fort Worth, Texas.
My name is Mel Robeck. I'm Senior Professor of Church History and Ecumenics and Special Assistant to the President for Ecumenical Relations at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena, California. I am also an ordained minister with the Assemblies of God.
Hi, my name is Tony Matthews, and I serve as Senior Pastor at North Garland Baptist Fellowship in Garland, Texas.
Well, thank you everyone for being here today. As you can see, we have a great panel assembled for today's discussion, a very diverse background group with regard to coming from different perspectives, religions, walks of life. Let's get right to our discussion, shall we? Today, many countries in our global community, including the United States, are divided by political ideologies, social and economic status, race, ethnicity, gender, and other categories. One major and pressing issue confronting the church and its leaders is how it should respond to the tremendous and massive migrations of peoples across the globe. In his 2009 book entitled Atheist Delusions, the author David Bentley Hart writes an essay entitled The Face of the Faceless. The central crux of his essay treats the radical stance to which the Christian Gospels witness that every person, including slaves, has full humanity, regardless of class, condition, or gender. In antiquity, these people were non-persons. They had no legal rights. They were, in the words of Hart, faceless. Jesus, by dying on the cross and being raised by God, the Gospels witness, gave them a face, their full humanity, their personhood. The stand Jesus took with the faceless can more properly be described as a vision of the kingdom of God. This kingdom of God should be the vision of the church today as it deals with the critical issues of immigration in our time. Today, I'd like our panelists to consider at least these three questions. First of all, how do you understand Leviticus 19:34, which says, "The alien living within you must be treated as one of your native born, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." Second question, how do you understand Luke 14:13 through 14, which says, "But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you'll be blessed because they cannot repay you." And then finally, has the immigrant or the asylum seeker become the contemporary faceless ones today? That is our topic of discussion for today. You've already heard the opening remarks and you've met our panelists. Let's go back to those who helped to begin the program. Canon Peterson, you opened with a remark. Could you please expand that?
Yes. I first became familiar with Bentley Hart's essay, The Face of the Faceless, this last summer while I was leading a pilgrimage in Jerusalem with Phil Jackson, the vicar of Trinity Church, Wall Street. This pilgrimage was for bishops and archbishops in the Anglican Communion. And as many people know, this next year, all the bishops and the archbishops in the Anglican Communion will be attending the annual meeting or the bicentennial meeting of the Lambeth Conference, which the Archbishop of Canterbury calls once every 10 years. I give this background because ever since I was introduced to this article by Hart, I have absolutely been haunted. It challenges me daily in relationship to how we respond to people who might be different than I am. How do we respond to someone who is different? Hart's argument is that slaves, non-citizens, and criminals in the first century were absolutely destitute, colonialized people who really did not exist. They had no existence. In other words, slaves had no rights before the law and no proper appeal from their masters. A slave was a man or a woman not having a person. Literally, that person was faceless. They had no identity whatsoever. This is the society into which Jesus was born. And it is in this society that Jesus lived and ministered. In other words, Jesus literally challenged the structures, social structures of the day, or as St. Paul in the epistle to the Philippians claims, that Jesus himself exchanged the form of God for a form as a slave. And therefore, literally overthrowing the powers that reign from on high. And so we look today to see how we today behave in relationship to the faceless within our societies. Jesus turned upside down the social orders. Criminals had a face. Slaves had a face. And Jesus turns up our social order by the text in Luke 14, by inviting the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Trovall. You also made an opening remark. Can you please tell us more?
Yes, first I want to completely affirm exactly what John has said and what Mr. Hart has also said in his essay. In the New Testament, it is true that Jesus lays out this radical claim about the equality of all people under God and even the obligation of the Christian community to receive those people. In fact, judgment at the end of time in the Christian understanding will be judged on how we treated the stranger. As we treat the stranger, so we treat Christ himself. So whenever we look in the eye of any other human being, whoever they are, no matter how different, no matter what their status, we're looking at Christ himself. And that, for what Christ did for us, that lays a heavy burden on us to care. The qualification I made is that just because God commands us to welcome the stranger doesn't mean that we have to open our borders without control. It's to the benefit of the migrant that nations welcome them. I think nations do have an obligation to welcome migrants, particularly, there's a difference between immigrants and asylum seekers. Asylum seekers generally are fleeing danger in their lives or persecution for religion or whatever. And it's an obligation of, I think, of a nation to receive those who are in that kind of turmoil and to take care of them. We certainly in the United States have an enormous capacity to receive those people. But it needs to be done in an orderly manner, really for the benefit not only of the nation, we who receive, but for those who are traveling. Immigration, nations also have the right to set laws on immigration. Now, in my opinion, our immigration law needs terrible fixing in this country. It's just not where it should be, but it does need to be also managed well for the benefit of those at home and the migrant, the immigrant.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Matthews, welcome to the program. Your thoughts on the subject, please.
Yes, the topic of borders is one that's going to be with us for a while. I'm reminded in the book of Numbers, chapter 20, when Moses was passing, he wanted to pass through Kadesh. He went to the king of Edom and he asked permission to pass, and the king said no. And the king also, in addition to saying no, sent guards out and troops to make sure that it didn't happen. So I think from a biblical standpoint, we see examples of people not being allowed to cross over, if you will. And I still grapple with, personally, on my own quest, is from a biblical standpoint and from a hermeneutical standpoint, I want to be careful not to take passages and apply them today in a way that they weren't applied in the there and then. And so I still grapple with the stranger, foreigner. What did it mean in the context? Did one have a legal standing that the other one did not have a legal standing? The whole border, I think we just need to treat people with love and respect. And gosh, we got to love humanity. And I'm with Carl. We have to have control of our borders. And I'm with Canon Peterson. We have to love people, man. We have to love humanity. But at the same time, there needs to be some controls.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Robeck, welcome to the program.
Thank
Your
you.
thoughts, please.
I sometimes fantasize about what God sees when God looks at the world. I don't think he sees any borders. I think what he sees is land masses and sea he created. All the borders that we have are humanly contrived, artificial kinds of things. They may run along rivers, as in the Rio Grande. They may be straight lines according to certain meridians. But the reality is most of these borders that we have been artificially put into place by people who don't always take into consideration the needs or the concerns of the people that actually live in those regions. I can think of Africa under colonialism. When colonialism broke down and they divided up all of these African countries, they didn't care which tribes were where. In some cases, they considered Muslim versus Christian religion, but in many cases, they broke long-standing relationships simply by writing it on a map. So I'm not terribly excited about borders. At the same time, I understand very clearly that any place that is taking people in has to have some control so that the people who live there are not hurt so badly, and so that the needs of the people who are coming are also met in the best possible way. But it strikes me that everything really goes back to the Shema in Deuteronomy. That God calls on us to worship one God, but also to love your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus reaffirms that in the New Testament. So I think if we think about these people as our neighbors, instead of simply those people trying to get into our country, they are our neighbors, then I think it changes the way we must look at them. As a Christian, I think, I know that in Southern California where I live, that enrolled in our school are people who do not have papers. I know that in my local congregation there are people who do not have papers. I know that when I walk to work, the 2 miles from my home to where I work, there are people without papers. What am I supposed to do with them? Castigate them? Throw them out? Call them names? Spit on them? No. I'm to love my neighbor. That's who's near me.
All right, thank you very much. Rabbi Levin and then Reverend Plumbley. Rabbi.
So I was taught by one of my favorite teachers that whenever you get close to a true paradox, you're close to something very holy, because it's only in that one God that two diametrically opposed ideas can both be true at the same time. And I think that we run up against that in this kind of a conversation. So on the one hand, there are 36 different times in the Torah where we are told that we have to care for and love the stranger. That in Leviticus 19, as you referenced, it says, "Ve'ahavta lirecha kamocha," you shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor who is like you. And then a few verses later, it says you have to love the stranger, the person who is lo kamocha, who is not like you. You have to love that person as well. And even every year as a Jew, we are asked to reenact the Exodus, to reimagine what it is like to be the other, to be the slave, to reenact what it is to be the oppressed one, to remind us that we have to love the stranger because we ourselves were strangers in the land of Egypt. At the same time, the very first thing the Holy One does in creating the universe is to create boundaries. This is day, this is night. And everything about our world is about keeping things in some way separate. There is a passage in the Talmud in Tractate Baba Batra which talks about the obligation of the beekeeper to keep his bees away from a mustard seed farm. And as Ellie Fisher, a commentator, writes, honey mustard is a great flavor, but each needs to be able to grow in its own distinctiveness in order for it to be what it needs to be. We are obligated to have borders and to defend them, but we also have to make sure that those borders are porous enough that it doesn't lock out all the things that are important in love and care and compassion for the most vulnerable and needy as we love the stranger who needs to be a part of us, not apart from us.
Thank you very much. Reverend Plumbley, your comments, please.
Thank you. I hate to follow Rabbi Levin with his profundity because I simply want to take things to the practicality of it and to say that not all these folks are those other people trying to get into our country. Some of them are our neighbors literally already right now. And everything that we do regarding immigration affects American citizens that are in the families of those people. There are something like 6 million simply American children, American citizen children, whose futures are in jeopardy because of the radical change in policy away from anything that purports to be family unification to family separation. I think something also needs to be said, again, along practical lines, about helping, about what's going on that's driving this train of migration northward from Central America. Part of the problem there is that our efforts to be helpful in those parts in those countries, Honduras, El Salvador, and Nicaragua, have been slashed budgetarily, and consequently, things are much worse off in those countries, and that is a major ingredient that is driving people northward. Nobody wants to leave home. Nobody wants to send their children on a 2,000-mile journey and trust them to the hands of a coyote that they've just had to pay a couple of $1,000s to put them on a train and to take them to the United States, where no telling what the person's going to do to them anywhere in between or anywhere along the line. Nobody wants to do that. It's because of what's happening at home that they're forced to do that. So we need to deal with what's going on down there as well as what's going on here.
All right, thank you. Dr. Matthews has another comment. Yes.
Just a follow-up, a question to Tom's comment, which is, he's spot on. So are we obligated to help those countries deal with their issues there rather than...
I'm saying it's in our self-interest to do so.
Right, okay.
It's not just a moral obligation, which
Right.
it certainly is from my point of view as a religious person, but it's also very very much in our self-interest to do that in order to help stem the tide of it. My congressional representative is a Republican on the right wing of the Republican Party, and it is nevertheless a spokesperson for aid to those countries in Central America for this very reason.
Just a few more comments before the end of this segment. Canon Peterson, very
and
quickly.
one of the problems, of course, in the exact area that you've been talking about, Guatemala, et cetera, the aid has all been cut there to enable that to happen. They had aid, but it's been cut by the government, which means massive immigration to the United States. Had we done what was supposed to be done with the aid that was already subscribed there, we would not be facing that problem today.
All right, thank you. And Rabbi, you had another thought?
I'm just reminded that in the book of Genesis, Abraham, in the most tender of moments after he had to perform his own circumcision, is conversing with the Holy One, and 3 strangers come by, and he leaves the presence of the Holy One to attend to the strangers. That it's not enough to say, I'll help somebody in need when it's convenient. I'll help somebody if it doesn't hurt too much. If Abraham could get up on the day that he got up in the heat of the day to attend to 3 people they were walking by, leaving behind the presence of God, that gives us, I think, a fairly good inspiration for how we ought to treat the stranger.
All right, thank you. That's all the time we have to end on that statement. Great statements all the way around. Thank you for the insight. There are some important announcements we'd like for you to hear. We'll be back in just a few moments.
Thank you, Pastor Lutz. We hope you are enjoying today's program. If you would like to learn more about the American Religious Town Hall, please visit our website at americanreligious.org. That's americanreligious.org. There you can read about the mission and history of the program, learn about the Town Hall estates, and view past programs by clicking the appropriate menu buttons. Each week, Pastor Lutz looks forward to receiving your letters. You may write to him at the address shown on your screen. Send your letters to Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. That's Pastor Jerry Lutz, American Religious Town Hall Meeting, P.O. Box 180118, Dallas, Texas 75218. Thank you for writing, and thank you for watching. And now, back to you, Pastor Lutz, and today's closing statements.
Thank you for standing by and listening carefully to that important announcement. And I, too, will encourage you to drop us a line. Go to the website, learn more about the Town Hall Estates. So lots of things that you can see there on the website. We hope that you'll take advantage of them. Now let's go to our summations. Let's begin with the gentleman to my right. Dr. Trovall, you're first.
Sure. The discussion today, I hope, has made everyone aware that these immigration issues aren't just issues of one country. They really are global issues in which nations have to cooperate to assist one another in helping people feel safe in their own countries, which would prevent migration. I think the other piece that I want to say is in Hebrews 11, the book talks about Christians being, it says our citizenship is in heaven. And Christians also understand themselves to be aliens on the earth, and so that to see the stranger is also to look at oneself as we wander, because our homeland is in heaven.
Thank you. Canon Peterson, your summation, please.
I believe that God stands with the faceless. And today, one of the faceless people or groups is certainly the immigrant. Jesus also takes the form of a slave, the rejected, the despised. And I would also argue that Jesus is one of the immigrants at the border today. The question I'd like to leave is this: does the face of Christianity in the United States today look like the face of Jesus?
Thank you very much. Dr. Robeck, your summation, please.
Yeah, one of the favorite passages of Scripture that I have is Mark 10, verses 35 to 45, where James and John come to Jesus and ask if they can sit on his right and left-hand side. And the disciples are walking behind, and they come up and they hear what's going on, and the RSV says they became indignant. Indignant. Boy, what a strong word that is. You guys are trying to pull one over on us. And Jesus turns to all of them basically and says, look, that's the way the world runs. That's the way things operate for the most part. But for you, it shouldn't be that way. For the person to be at the top, they really need to go down to the bottom and become a slave like these people. My sense is that we have a world full of people that are faceless, not just migrants, although there are 350 million people on the road right now around the world trying to figure out where they're going, what they're going to do for their families, and so forth. That's a huge number, but there are also people right next door to us who don't know anything, who have no idea where they're going, what's going to happen. They have nobody to advocate for them. And I think as a Christian or as a person of any kind of faith, that we need to take seriously the place that they are in and do what we can to help them.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Dr. Matthews.
Yeah, this conversation has taken place in many spaces and places, and it's one that's needed. And I just would like to encourage us to do what Paul told Timothy is to pray for kings and leaders and rulers so that we can live a life of peace. And I really hope the body of Christ comes together and start praying for these governments and their leaders. And let's talk about it. Let's walk what we talk about. And let's also pray that some change can take place so that everyone can have a face, if you will.
Thank you, Reverend Plumbley.
Thank you. I think we need to begin with an admission that we lock our doors when we leave our homes. Sometimes when we're at our homes, we lock our doors. Borders that have no stops anywhere, no locks anywhere, are not borders at all. We hear people say over and over again, our immigration policy is a mess. With 350 million refugees in this world, we need to take a look at that, and we need to ask those who are running for office, what do they intend to do about it? Not just allow them to get by with the simple bashing of the other side, but to give us a policy.
We have just a few seconds left, but Rabbi, your summation?
We're taught that every human being is created in God's image. And that means that the life of every single human being is of ultimate and infinite value. And there's a rabbinic teaching that says, why was only one human being created at the beginning? It was to teach that no one can say my lineage is greater than yours. Ultimately, the boundaries that we need to defend are the ones that keep in decency, honesty, integrity, kindness, and compassion, and that keep out greed and chauvinism and tribal pride. And if we can defend those boundaries, then we'll be in a lot holier place.
Thank you very much. This has been a very insightful, helpful discussion. Thank you for being here today, each one of you on the panel, and thank you for joining us today. That's all for today's program, but we're looking forward to coming back again, meeting around this table, and discussing other important issues like we have today. In the meantime, we do encourage you to go to the website where you can read more about the program, about the Town Hall Estates, and drop us a line with regard to subjects and topics you'd like to hear discussed on the program. The Charter of the American Religious Town Hall provides that Roman Catholics, Protestants, Jews, educators, and others may appear on this program and can declare their beliefs without hesitancy. And the rest of the members of the panel will uphold and guarantee that American right to all who will appear, irrespective of race or creed, so that the rest of the world can see that here in America, we believe in civil and religious freedom, not only in theory, but in reality. So now, friends, until next week at the same time and over this very same channel, the American Religious Town Hall meeting stands adjourned. And may the God of all of us bless all of you.